Hi, and welcome to Module 10. This module gives you instruction on how to write the literature review section of your final project. This portion of the assignment is similar to assignments you've probably already completed for other classes. The idea is to identify what others have written about your topic and published in peer-reviewed articles, as well as what remains to be said about your project and where your own work fills in some of these gaps and adds value to our knowledge on a particular subject matter. You're probably not the first person to explore your topic. However, you probably are the first person to use your specific dependent variable. For example, suppose you wanted to explain welfare policies in the 50 states. Well, you might have data from SPSS on public opinion for welfare for 1 year for all 50 states, but you might not have the exact data you want. Still, the underlying concept is going to be similar to what others have studied in the past. I am definitely asking you to make good with what you have available to you in SPSS, but to use other people's research to generate hypotheses and to add value to your own work, as well as to generate a framework to which you can contribute with your own paper. So almost no paper will be using your specific data, but other papers that have been published will be using very similar kinds of data and similar variables. You can use those papers to generate hypotheses, test those hypotheses, and then use your work to speak to the theories that these previous scholars have developed as a result. So you're going to be using something small, the data from SPSS, to speak to different big arguments, big trends, and big strains of literature. And that will be useful to everybody involved. You want to answer the following questions in writing your literature review. First, what does the literature say about your topic? What's missing? What remains to be said? How does your research fill these gaps? And what might you like to know that your research might not be able to tell you? How does your work fit in here? And how does your work relate to previous work in the field? That part's something you've done before. Some of you are exploring topics, though, that are so new that there's not a lot of published work in peer-reviewed journals on them. For example, the movement to decriminalize marijuana is a relatively recent one. In this sense, you might not find a lot of scholarly journal articles talking about your precise issue. Let's say if decriminalizing marijuana influences tax revenues in the state. But you'll find similar papers covering alcohol and tax revenue, or maybe marijuana legalization or decriminalization in other countries where there's been a long enough time period to study these issues that you can gather data. So your task in the literature review is to gather a lot of information. None of it, though, will be directly identical to what you're working on, but you want to draw parallels between other literature, other areas, and your work. You use that literature to generate hypotheses, and then you can test them. At the end of the day, you'll then be able to circle back around and use your results to shed light on some of the arguments in every subject matter, covering every topic. That's one of the most fulfilling parts about research for me, and I'm pretty sure you'll like it too when you get to that point. For now, though, you have to gather the information and identify what's come before you. Then you can start contributing to it in the next module. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.